This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hi, everybody. Brianna Whitney here, host of the True Crime Arizona podcast. We're coming on with a monster podcast, as I would call it, because there's so much information that's going to be in this about what we've learned in the last 24 hours about the death of 16-year-old Preston Lord. The reason why we've learned so much more is more than 1,000 pages in the police report were released on Thursday from the Queen Creek Police Department. We also got about 42 minutes of 911 calls that came in when this all unfolded at an out-of-control Halloween party back in October in Queen Creek. I want to introduce who's here with us. Chief Investigative Reporter Morgan Lowe. You've heard Morgan a lot on the podcast for years. He's going to be providing some context, especially when it comes to the legal aspect of what we've learned and how this could implicate the case moving forward. We have our senior investigative producer, Cody Lilick. Thank you for coming on. I know this isn't something you usually do in front of the camera or even the audio. And then we have our senior producer of our Nightside Newscast, Matt Colson. Same thing. Thank you for coming on. I know this is different than usual, and that's what's kind of cool about the podcast. We're able to bring some of the people who honestly make this operation work when we're trying to get things on the news and quickly. And so these two were instrumental in going through the police reports with a lot of us here at the station to try to understand what exactly took place on the night that Preston Lord was attacked. Just to get everybody up to speed in case people and listeners don't know, it was back on October 28th when 16-year-old Preston Lord was beaten at an out-of-control Halloween party that happened kind of in this rural area of Queen Creek in Arizona. That's outside of Phoenix. If you're not from Arizona, about 45 minutes to an hour outside of there. There were so many kids at this party. We knew about that before, but now we're getting more of an idea of how this happened. 7 people were eventually arrested for the crime. They are all facing first-degree murder. Some of them are also facing robbery. Those names, and the ones you're going to hear over and over as we go through this police report: Talon Renner, Talon Vigil, Taylor Sherman, William Owen Hines, Treston Billy, and Jacob Meisner. We knew those names before. Now we've been able to piece together what police were told, some by the suspects themselves and other peripherally from other witnesses and interviews of who did what when that beating occurred to Preston. I want to start with the 911 calls that we got before we go into the police report. None of us had heard really what took place that night. We knew that there was a lot of underage drinking. We knew there were hundreds of teens that were out. There were multiple parties that night, but this one in Queen Creek is where everything really happened. And so I want to start with one of the 911 calls from a homeowner. And that street doesn't have that many homes. I believe in the 911 calls, there are people saying there's only 5 homes on this street. And so they were seeing just a chaotic mess of kids running up and down, cars that looked like they were hitting each other and kind of almost doing donuts. And in this call, the reason why I wanted to play it is because this homeowner knew that something was going to happen if this wasn't stopped. So I want to play this first 911 call in full.
911 emergency.
Can we please get an officer at the corner of 197th Place and Via de Palmas? There has got to be at least 250 kids here. They're walking the streets. We're not used to this. I'm not used to this in my neighborhood from being here 25 years. There's too many cars. These kids are going to hit each other. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get killed.
Okay, really quick, is there any weapons or injuries that were involved?
Yeah, these kids have weapons on them because the kid just flew by and almost hit me when I walked out the street.
Do you see them having a knife or a gun, and were they pointing it at anyone?
He grabbed something from the side of his seat, I don't know, and called me an
Okay, so you didn't see a gun, so you didn't see a weapon?
No, but I see a lot of violence and a lot of stuff going on in these vehicles.
Okay, and what violence do you see?
They're going down the street right now. Okay, we have only 5 houses on our street, and they're coming from one corner down to the other, and they're doing at least 45 to 50 miles an hour.
Okay, and so they're
speeding. I have the legal right to stand in front of my property and tell people not to park in front of my home.
Okay, and I understand.
And I have the legal right.
Are they juveniles?
Yes, these are all juveniles.
Okay, and there's no weapons or injuries or complications?
Not yet, but this is pretty bad.
Okay, we're going to get you over to the Queen Creek Police. Give me 1 second.
And that was just one of the 911 calls that came in from several different adults talking about this is out of hand. Cars are everywhere. There's alcohol. There were some where they were describing kids throwing up in their front yard, running, hitting each other with their cars. And then this person is saying, look, someone's going to get killed if this doesn't get stopped. Morgan, listening to that, what was your biggest takeaway of the demeanor of people, these adults, that were clearly concerned before the fight actually happened?
Yeah, this is exactly one of those situations where people who lived in the neighborhood thought this is going to escalate. It's already bad. She was talking about violence, and she was talking about the sort of reckless behavior that some of these drivers and teenagers were taking part in. But she, clearly said this is going to lead to something worse. She was concerned, and, it shows early on that the tragic situation that happened at the end of the night, it didn't just happen on its own. Things led up to that. And it also showed, it sort of demonstrated when you're a 911 operator, you are trained to find out, is there a crime being committed right now? Is this an emergency that we need to dispatch emergency crews? Are there injured people? Does somebody have a weapon? So you could really hear the 911 operator sort of thinking out loud and saying, is this something that we need to dispatch police to right away? Or is this just something that we need to send the caller to the local police department to request an officer?
Right. And that was something we also learned in the police report that we'll get to. But I read that some of the kids that ended up being charged in the attack on Preston Lord said that police were already there by the time they got to the party. So there was clearly issues. This was already escalating to that point. And it seems like kids were still even coming to the party when police were already there. I want to go to the next 911 call, and then I'm going to bring Mac and Cody in about this. This 911 call is very chaotic. It's honestly a little bit difficult to listen to. This is the moment that people there, adults that were there, were administering CPR to Preston Lord after he was knocked out unconscious and on the ground. Interestingly enough, you hear in this call, and there are bits that are inaudible, so we know that, and just when you're listening to this, just understand we don't know bits and pieces, but for the most part, we know that these are trained lifeguards that ended up being there, and that played a huge role. So I want to play this call in full right now.
Okay, we do have a lot of help on the way. Okay, how old is the patient?
About 17-ish, young kid.
Okay, are you able to do CPR if you walk you through it?
Oh, there's a bunch of certified lifeguards. There's a bunch of certified lifeguards right now. We all know how to do CPR.
Okay, CPR is in progress?
Yes.
Okay, and how long have they been not breathing for?
Say it again?
How long have they not been breathing for?
We just, 2-3 minutes ago since we called you.
Okay. And do we know what caused them to stop breathing, or what happened?
We don't know, but he just got jumped. And
okay.
Here,
Just have them
me over.
Okay, have them continue hard and fast on the center of his chest.
Yes, he understands. He was vomiting a little bit, so we're putting him in recovery position right now.
Okay?
Yeah, we just put him in recovery position.
Okay.
Okay. Let's
compressions at all?
No. Okay, keep on going with compressions.
Yeah, have them go hard and fast on the
Just
center.
keep on with compressions.
I need you guys.
You have to keep on with compressions.
Yeah.
Stop. Oh, just keep him. I'll be right back.
Let me know if he starts responding or anything, okay?
Okay, well, we feel a pulse now. Keep on going.
Okay, but if he's not breathing, I need y'all to continue, okay?
Okay, is he breathing now? Here. Because then we have to start AR. That's different.
So you can do rescue breathing?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me know if at any point he does start breathing, he starts
It's very light. It's very light. It's very light. Do we still continue AR?
Listen, if it's not regular, I need you guys to continue with the compression.
Okay. We have to continue compressions.
Continue. Okay, go.
Okay.
Can they count out loud so I can hear how fast they're going?
I know the speed. We're going more like 120 BPM.
And you said a whole bunch of lifeguards are on scene doing CPR?
PD is about to be 97.
Right here, turn,
Okay.
over here.
Stay still? Do you want us to stay still?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you have police coming right now. Over here.
Okay, are they there with you?
Yes, they're running, and they have... Okay, EMS is taking over. Okay, thank you so much for helping us. We really appreciate it. Do I have to stay on the line?
Okay, no, operator.
Okay,
Okay, so obviously that was difficult to listen to. You can hear the screaming in the background as this is happening. I was really impressed with this caller. Clearly, she knew what she was talking about. She remained calm. She got the information to the dispatch that she needed, and they were actually the ones flagging down the police when they could hear the sirens in the distance getting there. At one point, it does sound like Preston Lord did have a pulse. And it wouldn't be until a couple days later that he would pass away at the hospital. Cody, when you're listening to that, what's your takeaway about the people that were on the scene there before the police got there and the information that they were giving to dispatch?
Yeah, it was remarkable just reading it in the report. And then I just heard this call for the first time here in the podcast. But it's remarkable to hear not only a person administering CPR, but these were, we believe them to be teenage lifeguards. So certified lifeguards, not expecting to deal with somebody in the water, you deal with minor things at a pool. You don't expect to deal with this in a street, in a neighborhood with a fellow teenager.
Yeah.
I mean, just as traumatic as that can be, just thinking about what was going through their minds and hearing how calm they were was so impressive in such a tragic scene.
And it was so tragic and unfortunate that Preston lost his life in this incident. He may have been pronounced dead that night had these people not jumped in immediately and started giving CPR when they had the training to do so. Queen Creek is pretty spread out. It's also a newer city here, or a newer town, I'm sorry. And so the houses can be spread out. And this was one of those areas where the streets fairly out there, it's fairly rural. And so they didn't know how long it was going to take for officers to actually get to the scene and then to navigate through the hundreds of kids and cars that were on one street. Yeah, these people really jumped in and did the best that they could. And you could hear that on the call.
And all of those kids and all of those vehicles, as the officers were arriving, were going the opposite direction, getting out of town. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they're having to navigate through that to get to the actual scene. And once they got there, they actually resumed CPR from the teenagers.
Right. Okay, so those were a couple of the 911 calls. I just wanted to have our listeners hear them as well, because they give you that, they put you there in the scene, and you can understand how terrifying this was, and just the amount of people that were trying to get to police to get Preston help. That is one aspect that we got on Thursday, minutes and minutes, 42 minutes that we went through with our team to listen to those. But what took up a lot of our time in the newsroom was trying to read and digest the information, the mound of information that we were learning as the preliminary police report was released by Queen Creek Police. We're talking more than 1,100 pages. That is a ton of information to go through. Some of it we had heard as rumors before, and those were either confirmed or deemed not credible. And then just so much more facts and witness statements and names than we had ever heard before in this too. So we're going to, all four of us, talk about different aspects of this. I'm going to start by how the crime happened. Now, obviously, we know that Preston Lord was beaten. It was a deadly beating because he did die from this a couple days later. But we didn't know who allegedly did what in the crime. There's 7 people who have been arrested for this. They're all teens and young adults. But now we have a better idea of how the fight started and who threw what punch or kicked or did the final kind of blow to Preston that really may have led to his death. And so I'm going to detail and outline what we know. A lot of this is in quotes that were either told to police from witnesses or quotes that the suspects themselves said on social media. So this is what we know now. The fight began over a gold chain. We now know it was a fake gold chain. And according to the police report, D Money ripped the chain off somebody. That man now identified as one of the 7 suspects, Dominic Turner. A family friend of Talon Renner, who's another suspect, then told police, quote, Talon said he hammer pounded Preston in the face 4 times and everyone surrounded him and started kicking him. That same friend goes on to tell police, Preston is lying face down. Someone climbed over and danced on top of him. Another witness interview then reveals a bit more. That witness tells detectives, when the man was on the ground, or when the male was on the ground, the group of kids began recording and humping the individual on the ground before they all ran away. Owen Hines, one of the 7 suspects, confesses his involvement to police personally. This is a quote from him. He said, straight up, bro, I was drunk, heat of the moment. I kicked him 1 time and I kicked his leg. He then goes on to admit to the officer more like 1, 2, or 3 kicks and then started to back off. Through Snapchat stories that were posted that night, we then learned that there's photographs of Treston Billy, another suspect, advising that he was the one who stomped on Preston's head. Right after this attack, the police report goes on to say that some of the suspects leave the scene together. This is what Taylor Sherman, one of the suspects, told police. He said that he, Talon Renner, Jacob Meisner, and Dominic Turner get in his car and leave. Taylor Sherman tells police once they got back to his car, Talon Renner told him, quote, I might have hospitalized that kid. I hit him pretty hard. And Taylor Sherman allegedly asked Talon how he knew that. And Talon responded, I hit, but so did other people. Now, I'm going to bring you guys in here in a second, but I want to read something. We know that a lot of these details are extremely disturbing. They are fairly egregious, and they're, for lack of a better word, pretty disgusting. And to address concerns of why we might include some of these, we want to give a little bit of context. The humping his body on the ground, dancing on top of him, hammer pounding him, those kind of words really could play a difference in what happens to this case when it comes to the court proceedings and the type of sentences that these suspects could face. I want to read this. I was talking to a criminal defense attorney, Russ Richelsoff, who practices here in Arizona, and I asked about those details. Could that play a part? And he said yes. So he actually gave me the Arizona statutes. I want to read them. This would be a regular aggravating factor that says, quote, especially heinous, cruel, or depraved manner in which the offense was committed. That would describe those. And then he went on to talk about death penalty and what aggravating factors could be there. Reason being is because at the moment, these kids or these young adults charged could face the death penalty with the first-degree murder charge. This is what he sent me. And he sent me the parts in the Arizona statute that would or could possibly apply in court. The defendant has been or previously was convicted of a serious offense, whether preparatory or completed. Convictions for serious offenses committed on the same occasion as the homicide or not committed on the same occasion but consolidated for trial with the homicide shall be treated as a serious offense under this paragraph. The defendant procured the commission of the offense by payment or promise of payment or anything of pecuniary value, or the defendant committed the offense as a result of payment or a promise of payment or anything of pecuniary value. The defendant committed the offense in an especially heinous, cruel, or depraved manner, so that goes for both. And then the defendant committed the offense with the intent to promote, further, or assist the objectives of a criminal street gang or criminal syndicate, or to join a criminal street gang or criminal syndicate. He said these are all death penalty aggravating factors that might apply, that the state could allege. He did go on to say he did not believe or doubts that they will file a notice of intent to seek the death penalty due to the suspect's ages. Morgan, you have so much experience in law and media law and law in general, and really are good at breaking down the legalese, so to speak. That's obviously a lot of words that can be kind of hard to interpret and then digest. So what are we looking at in that, and what do you expect to happen with these kind of actions?
Yeah, the next thing we're going to hear is going to be from the county attorney's office, and they're going to decide if this is going to be a death penalty case. Now, the ones who were minors at the time of the crime, there's Supreme Court precedent that says we don't execute kids for murders. We don't put kids on death row in the United States. It's happened in the past. So you can pretty much pull them off of that list. But there was at least one or two of them who were adults at the time of the crime. They're death penalty eligible. Now, again, what your attorney that you spoke to said is probably right on, which is they may not have been kids when they committed the crime, juveniles, but they are young. And a death penalty case for someone that young is pretty rare. Now, where these aggravating or mitigating factors would come up is in this sort of penalty phase. How much time are they going to spend in prison? This first-degree murder, even if they were juveniles at the time, because they're being tried as adults, they could face natural life in prison. So these aggravating factors, the behaviors that these kids did, that these young people did during the murder, that will absolutely have an effect on the penalty that they face. And it's pretty eye-opening when you heard that 911 call from those kids who were rushing to aid to try to save this kid's life. Their behavior compared to the behavior of the kids who jumped on the victim in this case and killed the victim. Those kids in that fight could have stayed and tried to resuscitate him. They could have said, oh my gosh, this got out of hand. Now we need to help this kid, the suspects in this case. They did not. They behaved the way you described, and then they took off. So that absolutely will play into any aggravating factors. And then, there are mitigating factors that the judge or the jury will look at. The ages of the defendant, that would lower a potential penalty. Did they play a minor role in it? And apparently in this case, none of these people were accused of playing a minor role because they're all charged with first-degree murder. But the other one is, are they able to appreciate the wrongfulness of their actions? And so everything that we have seen, the answer there is no. No.
A loud no. And later in the podcast, we're going to talk about things that they said too, especially on social media.
Yeah. And so, when you're looking at a death penalty type case, they have to look at, is there proof beyond a reasonable doubt that at least one aggravating circumstance exists here, and a finding that there is no mitigating circumstance that's sufficiently substantial to call for leniency. And so that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at young people who did something horrible, who apparently looked like they were celebrating about it, and then took off to, left him for dead. You had other young people who came there and tried to save him. So yes, their behavior, their tweets afterwards, or their social media posts, all of this is going to go into and become very, very important as this trial moves on.
Yeah. And there was one thing in those statutes that I mentioned, and I've heard you talk about it before, during the commission of an act. Can you explain why that's so important with these first-degree murder charges and then the robbery charges that some of them are facing?
Yeah. So first-degree murder is normally a murder that you plan. It's with malice aforethought. You think about it ahead of time with a bad frame of mind, and you kill somebody. You plan to kill. There's no evidence that these kids went out that night planning to kill somebody. But the prosecutors and the police are looking at this like they held him down. He was not able to leave. So that is a kidnapping charge. And then he died as a result of that dangerous felony. So that makes it a felony murder case. So they can be charged with first-degree murder. And then there's the robbery as well, which also occurred. But the first-degree murder charges hinges on that kidnapping charge. And if the jury doesn't accept that, the prosecutors have already said that they're going to go for second-degree murder, which could be 25 years in prison. So you're looking at potentially natural life, unless it's a death penalty case, and it's a death penalty, natural life for the first-degree murder, or potentially 25 years for the second-degree murder.
And that's incredibly important when we look at where we go next with this entire case. During all of that, you know, we're hearing them talk about, well, I kicked him, I did this, that there's a lot of people around. Cody, you were going through the interview in the police report with the homeowner themselves, and we have gotten a lot of questions as a whole. Well, were the homeowners there? Are they going to be charged? Did they know what was going on and how out of hand it was? What did you learn from reading the interview with that homeowner?
Well, they were there at the time. The homeowner basically told police this was supposed to be a small gathering. It was not supposed to be as large as it ended up being. He said that he was unaware that this was being circulated on social media. We all read about this Snapchat spreading of this event, this party that all the teens were at that night. And the homeowner denied any allegations. He told police, he said he never allowed his children or friends to drink alcohol at his residence. Regarding the incident that night, he told police that he heard, he was basically in, I believe it was the living room of their residence, and heard a female yell, "Stop," and that's what made him get off the couch. And he then saw several people walking in the backyard. He went into the backyard and he told police he was, quote, "overwhelmed and surprised," end quote, when he observed a large amount of kids that he didn't realize were there. So somehow he was in the house and had no idea that this mass of teenagers was there. He started yelling, "Get the F out now," repeatedly. He said that he yelled it so many different times that eventually the teenagers started to get the hint and started to leave the backyard through, he said, the RV gate. He said he denied seeing anyone consuming alcohol and didn't witness any alcohol anywhere in the backyard, but said he wasn't really looking for it when he was outside. He was only trying to get everyone to leave. He also told police, it ended in the section of the report that I read, that he didn't hear or see anyone fighting at any time and didn't see anyone filming with their phones.
That part of the report is interesting, though, because it contradicts another part. So, Mac, I'm going to bring you in. You actually just found this page here. We have the Queen Creek Police Report pulled up on this computer in case we need to reference anything. Matt, can you talk about this other part that shines light into the homeowner's potential actions here?
Right. So that's what the homeowner said to police. And then later, 600 pages into the report, there's video surveillance that shows a beer bong table set up in this RV garage. In the video, sirens are heard in the background, and you can see the homeowners cleaning up the RV garage and closing the door. Then when police investigated further, in the trash can, they found empty alcoholic beverage containers.
So that more or less contradicts the part when they said they didn't know what was going on. Interesting. That's most of what we learned about the homeowner's role in this, or alleged role. Morgan?
So, you know, there's no allegation that this homeowner contributed to the death of this young kid, of this 16-year-old boy. Now, the circumstances might have had something to do with that. And there could be, you know, potentially misdemeanor charges against a homeowner if they had a party and there were teenagers drinking there. I don't know that police are looking at that, but they're still working on this case, so there may still be arrests and citations given, and we'll probably talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, it's never a good situation when you tell police one thing and they look at the tape and there's something else.
Yep, and surveillance, time and time again, some of the most damning evidence in any sort of case, because it gives you the eyes right there of what actually happened, despite what people are saying. So videos playing a huge part in this story. Videos, pictures, and messages. So I want to talk about how the 7 suspects were caught. We're going to give some insight into a lot of what they themselves and others said on social media apps and Snapchat. So let's start with Talon Renner in a Snapchat that he sent around midnight. So this is the same night that Preston Lord was killed. This is almost immediately after. October 28th, the police report shows suspect Talon Renner sent a Snapchat around midnight telling someone he was drunk, got in a fight, and killed a kid. Then Talon Renner writes, I got in a fight, a big group fight, and I accidentally killed a kid. He goes on to write, and this is a direct quote, I guess I'm just too strong. Meanwhile, the report shows another screenshot of a Snapchat conversation. These are words that are believed to be suspect Talon Vigil. It shows that it's from Talon, spelled like Talon Vigil in quotes. And he says, I hit a kid, and this kid hit his head, and then they kicked his head in the ground. And then I got word he died, so I don't know. 2 days after the assault, so those were on October 28th. Then 2 days after, on October 30th, there's these texts that show a redacted conversation. And that is hard because while we have so many words and so many messages in the police report, it is important to note to our listeners and our viewers that there are parts that are redacted. So we don't know exactly who's saying what. Preston Lord's name is also redacted, but we know that many of these sentences are referring to him as the victim. In this conversation, though, one person says, bro, that kid died. And someone responds, I've known D-Money for so long, about 7 years. We now know D-Money is suspect Dominic Turner. The next day on Halloween, the same conversation's going on. Someone writes, Tresty or Talon might be getting charged with murder. That discussion goes on to say Treston Billy, who was one of the 7 suspects, kicked Preston Lord and that the cops have their info. Now, this was all reportedly also shared with Talon Renner's football team. We knew he played for ALA Gilbert. The report says Talon has video of the attack on his cell phone, and he showed that video to his football team and bragged about it. It was then reported that Talon Renner said, oh, I put this kid on life support. The report details that police acted pretty quickly with this information. They actually started serving search warrants on some of these suspects less than a week after the attack on Preston Lord. Cody, I want to start with you kind of debriefing that information. And the reason why is because a lot of this is happening on Snapchat, some of it over text, but there was quite a bit in this report talking about the social media apps that played a factor in this investigation and how many there were. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's really kind of delving into the mind of a teenager, basically. All of these apps that teenagers use was really brought to the forefront of this investigation and is going to play a key role as the investigation continues and then goes into prosecuting this crime. But in the report, it mentions just one instance, one of the searches that police did. They reviewed Kik, WhatsApp, Messenger, Telegram, Facebook, Discord, Life 360, TikTok, native messages, and FaceTime. So, I mean, just a ton of apps, a ton of information comes from each one of those apps, especially, you know, this doesn't even mention Snapchat, which was the key player in all of this, mentioned in a lot of these interviews, especially that one message that you mentioned is listed in several interviews with witnesses, with suspects. Everybody seemed to have gotten that message.
Yeah.
And even though Snapchat is believed to be this app where, you know, it's supposed to be gone within 24 hours or whatever I set it to, but nothing is ever gone in the digital age.
Yeah, and it does appear that when they sent letters to Snapchat to preserve, they got responses very quickly. So these messages that these young people may have thought were going to disappear immediately, like Snapchat does, did not disappear and were given back to police and are being used as evidence.
And it's also good to remind people and note too that maybe some did disappear, but people are taking screenshots of this stuff. It doesn't matter what app you send it on, especially once people knew that there was a kid who allegedly died. I mean, they were on it. And so it was interesting, though, to read about how quickly Snapchat as a company got back to police in a criminal case. Mac, I want to bring you in for this part because this is something that we talked about, how we were going to cover this and what were the most important aspects of this police report. And one that you and I identified pretty quickly was, wow, a lot of this is the suspects telling us about what happened in their own words, in their own Snapchat messages and things like that. So what was your takeaway on that?
Well, that's something that came out pretty quickly with the community when this happened. And there was like, well, these are a bunch of kids involved. There has to be video. There has to be people talking. And come to find out now in the police report, that was the case. All of this is the kids that would go on to be the suspects saying what happened in their own words, and some of them admitting to exactly what happened and confessing that they were involved.
And it was interesting too, because some of them, from what we are at least able to read, it looks like Talon Vigil takes this kind of, I don't know what happened approach, but Talon Renner from these words is bragging about this to his football team, saying, I put this kid on life support. I mean, not only were they talking about it, they were proud of it. And so, Morgan, in the legal setting here, as we go forward, how is this all going to be used in evidence? Is this going to be the most damning evidence against these 7 suspects for any sort of potential conviction, even some sort of plea deal and possible sentence?
Yeah, in legal terms, this is called an admission against interest. It is you saying, admitting that you did something against your interest, and they're admitting what they did. However, this was all very useful for police to identify suspects and come up with probable cause to believe that a crime was committed and that this person committed the crime. Whether any of those Snapchat or conversations between them is going to be admitted in court is a totally different question, because you have to be able to prove and show that it was actually that person using their phone to communicate this. Now, if one of these suspects told somebody, hey, I did this in person, or they saw them typing, or they were with them when they did it, that's corroborating. That's the kind of thing that can get into court. So I am curious to see how much of this makes it into a jury trial, because there is that question. Can you prove that it was really that person writing that?
And that must become an issue with so many social media apps, right? I mean, somebody makes a profile, how are they linking it back to make sure it's that person, especially in an age where there's AI and people can impersonate people or steal identities online all the time? What goes into proving somebody is who they are on a social media app?
I mean, it's corroborating, and it is, they also have, they've used GPS coordinates to tell where some of these people were because of their phone. So, I probably came off like this is probably not going to make it into court. There are plenty of murder cases and other, really high profile and serious trials that this kind of chatter and admission does make it in. It is just, it's not automatic that those are going to be useful in trial.
Yeah, and in other cases, when you don't have an app specific, you have, the FBI Assist, and I know you've reported on it several times with cellular technology. A suspect could then say in court, well, it wasn't me. Well, it's your phone and, that unique device number that they're able to track. And so one would assume that these apps log the device, that you can say it was Brianna's phone, it was Mac's phone. So you don't have the absolute fact that you did that message, but it's your device.
And I want to point this out too. Morgan, you and I have covered so many different trials, especially when it comes to murder cases. It's hard because truly every case is different with how it plays out in court. It depends on who the attorneys are. It depends on what evidence there is. Evidence that might be admissible in one trial could be completely dismissed in another. And so saying like a blanket statement of this is how it usually goes and this is what we expect to happen is nearly impossible when it's coming to things like this, especially with 7 suspects who could have different circumstances that play out for each individual person depending on their history. Do they have prior criminal offenses and things like that? We never see it the same.
Yeah, every case is completely different. And in this case, with the chaos that was going on and the 7 suspects with probably, different motivations now, I'm imagining that none of them want to go to prison. we may see a situation where one or two of them testify against the others, hoping for some leniency and maybe saying, I saw him typing this, I'm corroborating that this was so-and-so who admitted doing it.
And we already saw at least two of the suspects in this case did have direct interviews with police that were in the report. Not all of them did, but at least two of them did have a conversation. I personally read the interviews between Taylor Sherman and police and William Owen Hines and police.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add in the abundance of evidence that we now see in this police report, which I think was so frustrating to the community, was like, we all know this. Why aren't the police acting, and what's taking so long? That became a police problem too. They had to look through all of this evidence and corroborate it. But I think while they had the abundance of evidence, that's what was so time consuming, was taking it all and making sure it was verified.
And we know through the police report that they were actually taking witnesses and people back to the crime scene and physically walking out, okay, you saw what and where, and then when you were at this location, what took place, and doing that over and over again. And that takes a lot of time, especially when you're trying to corroborate. One person might tell you something, but you can't take that as fact. And so they knew that they needed to go back through. Talon Renner is mentioned a lot in this police report. He's one of the 7 suspects, but it's not just him that's mentioned. It's what his family allegedly did after Preston Lord was killed that makes a good chunk of this police report up. Mac, you went through this part of the pages here. A lot of this coming from an ex-girlfriend of Talon's dad, Travis. So I'd like you to take us through this, because this does show that there was some motive to trying to cover up what Talon allegedly did. And that could also become a factor when we're looking at what happens with him. So what did you read from this part of the report?
One of the most revealing interviews police did that sheds light on Talon Renner and his family is with this longtime girlfriend of Travis Renner. It's a woman who had dated him for 6 to 7 years. They had bought homes together in Gilbert. She lived with some of the family, and in here it says that the wife, Travis Renner's wife, Becky, knew about the affair. It was public to her. Even though they had broken up prior to the attack on Preston, she still had access to Travis's credit card history, which becomes relevant.
Wow.
She told police after the assault, Talon was taken to a family cabin in Show Low. She went on to say while Talon was at the cabin, she was getting messages from him on Snapchat. He sent her a photo of himself walking their family dog, Gucci, and she told police she could tell in that photo that his jaw was swollen. She also told police there that the attorney had actually advised the Renners to let Talon's hands heal before bringing him back into town. So it was an intentional thing that they took him up to this cabin in Show Low. She described Talon as an angry kid and a fighter. She said he holds a lot of aggression, and when he snaps, he snaps. She describes him as muscular and full of rage. And because she was part of the family for a long time, she told police that she cares for him and she feels bad that he can be misunderstood. But the turning point for her was when she heard about a video surveillance. There again, the video comes into play, where he talks about getting away with this and it being a closed casket incident.
And that's, again, we've got Talon allegedly saying things like, I guess I'm too strong. I killed him. I put him on life support. This is closed casket. These are all egregious things that are said that clearly show that he is disgustingly proud of what happened.
He certainly has no problem talking about it. And as Cody mentioned, the same texts are seen in a ton of reports. So he's sending this out to everyone.
Not able to appreciate the wrongfulness of the conduct.
Aggravating factor right there. Mac, that report goes on to talk a little bit more about this family history where people were afraid of the Renners and that there was some claims that they are paying people off. Do you have that part pulled up?
I do. The ex-girlfriend in this, she mentions she does a phone interview with the police and she does an in-person interview. And the in-person interview is because she's afraid that Travis he's paying her phone bill and has access to her phone. So she was more comfortable doing the in-person interview, but both times recognizes this fear and power aspect. So this talks about how Travis talks down about the police and brags about how he can buy their kids out of trouble. The report says, for example, Travis once made a $10,000 donation to American Leadership Academy, ALA, and he sponsors sports programs through his business, One Stop Nutrition, to prevent them from kicking Talon out of school.
So here we're allegedly leveraging the business, the money, knowing that Talon has issues, and clearly there was some past issues that played a part there. ALA comes up a couple times. Cody, you went through and actually read an interview with the ALA Dean of Students that shed a little more light about Talon Renner. What does that say?
Yeah, this was noted as the Dean of Students at ALA Gilbert North. This was regarding Talon Renner. He confirmed, of course, that he was a student at ALA Gilbert North and was last seen at school on Halloween, which this incident happened, I believe, the 28th.
Correct.
So he was last seen at school on the 31st and was excused to leave early that day around 10:50 in the morning. And it's further, he goes on to tell police that family advised the school that people were calling Talon a murderer on social media, and they wanted Talon to complete schoolwork online. So that lines up with what you guys had just detailed. It also says that on the 2nd, a student told the dean that she overheard, it was redacted, tell someone in class that Talon Renner was drunk at a party, got into a fight, and killed a kid. The police report goes on the next page to then say, as we have all heard before, on Saturday, 10/28/23, Talon sent a snap on Snapchat around midnight. And it says Talon in the snap, as you verbatim said, I got in a fight, a big group fight, and I accidentally killed a kid. And then another one, I guess I was just too strong. And then it says the snaps from Talon were gone, and whoever this was did not take screenshots.
But they still have them, and everybody else ended up with them. I mean, talk about corroborating information. We hear this over and over and over again, those exact quotes that at this point feels like dozens of people saw, whether that was other kids or parents. Morgan, how is this all going to possibly affect this case? Nobody else has been charged in Preston Lord's death. There haven't been any peripheral charges with this incident specifically. We obviously know there's other East Valley teen violence incidents. Some of those involve, the other, the Talon Renner's brother, Kyler, but he is not part of Preston Lord's death. But the Renner family, allegedly in this police report, clearly goes to lengths to hide what Talon's involvement may have been, hide his injuries, cover it up. And they're talking about fear, people fearing them, and that's how they were functioning in this community. Could any of this affect other charges that could come, not murder, but hindering an investigation or giving false facts, anything like that?
Yeah, it's really easy to view them taking their son and putting him up in the White Mountains at their, mountain cabin while he's healing as something that's nefarious or hiding, unless the police were trying to track him down, unless the police were saying, we need to take pictures of you. And we know that the police had already done that a few days after the murder. They had issued a search warrant, and they took pictures of him. They took his DNA. So I think that although that sounds really nefarious, I don't know that that's legally problematic at all. However, reading through, a couple hundred pages of this police report that I did yesterday, there are a lot of other potential charges against some of these kids and some of the other people who were just there that night. One of the first quotes that I saw was somebody telling, erase that video, to kids who were videotaping the incidents of that night. And so, there's obstructing criminal investigations. There is threatening or intimidating. We've heard from parents that their kids were threatened or intimidated into not talking to police about this. There's false reporting. If somebody said, oh, I didn't see anything, and then they did see something. We saw several cases of where people changed their tune as this investigation went on. That's a misdemeanor. Some of these other ones are felony charges. And then there are other just assaults. There seemed like there were multiple fights that happened that night. And it really did seem like this community was sort of numb to the fact that at these parties, this group or other kids go around and they fight. And it seems like that was just sort of accepted. Well, it's against the law to assault somebody. And so I would not be surprised if some of these other charges come down after police, obviously they're focusing on the murder charges now, but they were still interviewing people as of a week before they released this police report. So, you know, all signs indicate they're still looking into this crime as well as other crimes, like you said, that are sort of going on outside the periphery of this investigation, and this murder.
Yeah, and it was Preston Lord's death that unfortunately served as a huge catalyst for investigations being reopened, new investigations coming to light that involved this alleged group of kids known as the Gilbert Goons in the East Valley who would go around just, quite frankly, just beating kids up. We have been waiting to learn whether the Gilbert Goons are going to be determined as a criminal street gang in Arizona, and if they are, that could affect the charges that kids are facing in several of these East Valley teen violence assault cases. But Gilbert Goons comes up all the time. And there were so many people talking about the Gilbert Goons that said, hey, we've heard this name for a while. Why didn't police hear about the Gilbert Goons? And are these kids part of this group? And what is this group? Gilbert Goons was mentioned several times in this Queen Creek police report. Cody, can you talk about where the Gilbert Goons seems to come from and how it's talked about in these pages?
Yeah, it was mentioned several times over and over. It was well known throughout these witnesses and suspects. And one thing that stuck out to me was on one page of the report that I looked at. It said this was not even 2 full days after Preston Lord's attack, so that would probably be roughly around when he was pronounced dead.
Halloween.
Well, so it was shortly before that. It was 10:30. So October 30th, a tipster. So the Queen Creek Police Department, basically, they were starting to get so many tips. They assigned somebody to this tip line. It was their main job. So some of these pages in the police report were summary of tips. So this one says the tipster believed the suspects were part of the Gilbert Goons. Quote, he has heard in the past the Gilbert Goons are known to assault people, end quote, and believes they attend ALA Gilbert North. You know, a very small tip, but it just shows that not even 2 days after that tragic attack, that police were getting tips. Look at the Goons, look at the Gilbert Goons. And, you know, in the report, I know that you guys have seen it as well. They're referred to as, you know, the Gilbert Goons, the Goons, G's. You know, there's so many different nicknames and also different social media groups that they had. I think one of them was even called Social Studies, which was
on Snapchat.
Quite bizarre. But yeah, they just took on so many different iterations that it seems that these kids communicated and kept in touch. But police were aware, at least on the 30th, you know, to start looking at the Gilbert Goons, because it was known to, at least to this tipster, that they are known to assault people.
And Mac, yeah, you had this come up for you as well.
Yeah, and that revealing interview with the ex-girlfriend of the dad of Talon Renner, she talks about the Gilbert Goons, explained that her son is actually the one that told her about Talon's involvement, and the police asked her what her understanding of that group was, and she says they get out of cars and beat the crap out of kids.
And that is the MO that we have seen over and over again, especially at the Gilbert In and Out, where a lot of these assaults are taking place. There was something that I read in the report too. I don't remember what page it was, but it was some of these kids talking to police saying that there are the Gilbert Goons, but that they don't like being referred to as the Gilbert Goons. They don't like being called that. So it was a pervasive topic that comes up in this report, and it certainly wasn't something that police didn't know. I mean, they knew about it very quickly right after Preston's death. Ironically, in that time frame, you had the Gilbert police chief saying, we didn't never know about the Gilbert Goons. We've never heard of this. Yes, we've had some teen violence assault cases, but no, we don't know if it's the Gilbert Goons. They've now since been reopening and reinvestigating these cases and seeing if they are related to the Gilbert Goons. And that's why the Gilbert police chief and the police department came so under fire, because people in the community are saying, wow, you have this pattern of attacks that's happening over and over again, some in the same places. How are you not seeing this pattern, and how are you not looking at it if everyone else knows that there's potentially Gilbert Goons?
Well, and Morgan, you know, you interviewed somebody who used to work on these kind of cases and says that, you know, that kind of chatter had to have been circulating around the departments and had to have been, you know, on the streets. You have to know some of these things, right?
Yeah, should have been. And then, you know, and this idea that that it's not a criminal street gang. That's going to be a determination that the prosecutor makes, most likely whether it's going to help their case or not. But it is very difficult to see this pattern and practice of behavior and not be able to attribute that to a gang. You know, it's the same kids, similar kids doing all of these. It's a similar MO, and they keep doing it, and they've got this name that they use, and that has to be a big part of what the prosecutor's office is looking at as they decide whether they're going to name it a criminal street gang. And as you said, that is going to have huge ramifications on charges as well as potential criminal prison sentences.
And we know that there are, I think, about 6 agencies that are investigating whether it is a gang. The Gilbert Police Department is the lead agency on that. The last time we talked to the Gilbert Police Chief, he said that they had made significant progress in that investigation to determine whether they are or not, but they weren't ready to announce something like that. So we are still waiting for that aspect to come down. You know, one thing I want to talk about too, this is obviously an overload of information. It's hard to digest. There's so many names, there's so many actions, there's social media apps, there's laws, legalities. I mean, it is heavy and it is overwhelming, but at the center of it all, I do really want to honor Preston Lord's life in this podcast episode, because sometimes when we're talking about the legalese and all of these details, it can get lost that friends and family lost Preston that night. There was a 911 call we didn't play of a kid that was frantic and distraught about what happened to Preston. And those kids were the ones that were traumatized by watching their friend get beaten to death. Preston Lord's parents have been such community advocates in getting out there and spreading the message of being an upstander and calling police if you see something, and not standing for sitting silently and letting this teen violence take over the East Valley. And so I know how difficult this has been. I've talked to Preston Lord's parents' attorney several times about this, and she's talked about how difficult it is to have your son's story all over the news and the headlines, and to see these awful acts and to have to look at that and say, like, that's what he went through. That's what he went through. And this is awful to have to relive. And while they are very thankful for the attention that not only Preston Lord's case has gotten, but hopefully the change that Preston's life will make, that part is something that they can hold on to. But just the difficulty of an entire community talking about this for months now. We can only hope that this is one step closer to justice for Preston, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. I want to give our listeners and viewers a little behind the scenes context about this. I will say, in my 6 years of working just in Arizona, I've never seen what happened yesterday, where we had an entire newsroom and news team jump into action to try to understand this as quickly as possible so that we could get the most accurate and important information into our newscasts, and now on this podcast that we could. And for example, Mac and Cody, you guys aren't on air. You are some of our top producers that work with us behind the scenes, and a lot of people never get to hear from producers about this. Mac, you were heavily involved in this. I just want our listeners to understand, I mean, we had managers, producers, reporters who were working on other stories, everybody taking about 100 pages of this police report and trying to break down, okay, what was the most important things that I read on these pages, and then coming together. What was that like for you to watch? I mean, it was incredible teamwork, but to watch this come together as it did with this overflow of information.
Yeah, you know, as soon as it came in, we knew, okay, how are we getting 1,100 plus pages in the time frame that we have? And honestly, within 5 minutes, we had established, okay, we're going to take these 50, and people from, like you mentioned, all across the newsroom coming in to put those together and compile their notes. And then once we were all doing that, we took probably about 45 minutes to an hour to do that. We were seeing themes, and we were all, as we're all reading them, you know, things are popping out, and we're seeing these names of the suspects, and we're noticing just how quickly these names were brought into the police reports, and how police knew within days that night who they were looking at. And then we all gathered, met in a conference room, and just pulled out the themes, and we talked about, all right, what's the most important stuff in here, and what do we need to get on the air tonight?
And it's hard because our station here has a lot of newscasts. And so we quite literally had about an hour and a half time between the end of our meeting of, okay, everybody put in all your information that you learned. How do we need to best convey this for our newscasts that are coming up at 8, 9, and 10 p.m.? And then what are we going to put on digital and social media and things like that? And that's a difficult feat. Cody and Morgan, you guys are part of the investigative team, which is a huge part of the news team, but also its own section. And you guys jumped in right away and said, okay, this is your expertise. What was that like for your unit to come in and be a part of that bigger picture last night?
Well, I mean, just behind the scenes, this happened at probably the busiest time of day for a newsroom. Yeah. So it was crunch time for anybody and everybody, even not on this case on a normal day. So that was a key thing that, had us jump in right away, was that, everybody was busy. And it's just seeing the length of phone calls, it was 41 minutes, I believe, and 1,162 pages, I believe.
To be exact.
Yes. So it was quite the undertaking, and, we always just jump in there. So we jumped in and grabbed a few hundred ourselves and just started making notes and comparing and recognizing these themes.
Yeah. Morgan, you came in right away with that meeting saying, okay, here's what I'm noticing. And you and I are probably two of the reporters that go through court documents and police reports the most, solely because we are looking at a lot of these high profile cases. Did this one stick out to you compared to other reports that you've looked at? Was there anything that you saw that was like, wow, this is different than I'm usually used to seeing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we knew what happened in this case and we knew who the police believed did it. But there was a big void of what happened that night. So when I started looking at the report, I had two questions. What's new and what's notable? New, is there conversations? Are there admissions? What were they able to figure out about what led up to it? And then the chaos and what was happening as, Preston Lord was being beaten, what led up to that. So that's really what I was looking for. And I just skimming through the pages and making notations and making sure, because I knew you were going to be on the air with it, include a page number, quotes where they need to be, and just try to focus on what is the most important thing there. And I've seen some police reports that have been 800 or so pages long. I don't think I've ever seen an 1,100 page, just one police report. Understandable, because there are 7 suspects here, and there were hundreds of people who were around at the time. And it's pretty safe to say that police interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of witnesses. So that creates this huge police report.
Yeah, Cody, you were talking about the perspective of how long this report was to us before this podcast. What did you say?
I looked into, what are some of the lengthy reports that, news agencies have reported on recently. And, the big one that came up to me was the Mueller report, which was investigating the 2016 election interference. That one was only 448 pages.
I mean, that really puts it into perspective. What we're looking at here, this is not typical for one case. And that's huge.
And that one that's the buttoned up summary. It was the Mueller report. So that's all of basically the facts that mean something. So what we have is everything that police have. And what Morgan was saying, the key thing to remember, they're not done.
Yeah.
So this is going to get longer.
They're sifting through a lot of the things we see in here is this person told this person. But what I found notable is the police are following up on all of those. There's reports, it's secondhand information, but they're having these interviews and conducting them, and they make it into the police report, and they follow up with trying to get back to that initial source of that information.
Yeah, you see from reading this that police were they're trying to do a bunch of things, but 2 things in particular stuck out to me. Trying to find out if these suspects admitted that they did it, and how those admissions happened, and then also trying to find eyewitnesses. And so that goes, they interview a bunch of people, and then they chose some of those people who they interviewed who saw things clearly. They took them out to the neighborhood and did these, what they call walkthroughs. Walk through with the witnesses. And sometimes it was multiple times with the same witnesses. Who was there? What was there? What were you seeing over there? The last time you told me it was a little different. Clarify that now. And so that's how they sort of boiled down to, this is the most important evidence. These are going to be the key witnesses, and these are the key statements that the suspects may have made that implicate themselves.
Well, and it's also a way to make sure that the stories stay the same. You interview people the first time, they're in the heat of the moment. They are more than likely a teenager. They just saw probably the most traumatic thing that they've ever seen in their life. So, you know, getting a statement then and then getting a statement after the fact is probably two entirely different things.
And one more sort of aspect to this that I just thought of, because it reminded me of something I heard from an investigator in the Brian Miller case. That defense took years and years to put together. And one of the issues was that the defense attorneys, because that was a capital case, you know, this could be death penalty, it could be life in prison. The defense attorneys wanted to interview every single witness, every single person who the police talked to. We have 7 defendants here who are going to have different defense attorneys. They're not going to be represented by the same person. Each of those defense attorneys is going to go in and try to interview every single person who police spoke to. So this is just going to be a case that its depth and breadth is not something that I've seen recently or that I can even remember as a journalist covering courts and crime.
This is going to take a long time, too.
A lot of them have some pretty notable attorneys, too, that they've hired. I mean, a few have public defenders, but we have a list of who they've hired and who didn't hire anyone. It's pretty interesting.
And one of the other sort of, you know, aspects of this is if it's a death penalty case, you get a whole team of defense attorneys. If it's just a life in prison case, you might get the public defender who is overloaded and not, because when it's somebody's life at stake and the state may end up executing somebody, there's a ton of resources that go in to make sure it's prosecuted correctly as well as it's defended correctly. If it's a life in prison case, those defendants, if they can't afford a terrific lawyer, they get, not that that our defense attorneys that are paid for by the county are not terrific, but they have a lot on their plate. And so, you know, this is going to be very expensive for those families.
I'm glad you guys all shined light on that, because I think, you know, if people listening are viewers of Arizona's Family in the Newscast, they just watched me go on last night and talk about what we learned in a very quick manner. Obviously, we only can put so much on air, but this really gives that transparency of what we're doing behind the scenes and why it matters. And I like to let our viewers and listeners in to understand how we get somewhere and what goes into doing that. And it was something I hadn't seen. And I think what makes Arizona's family is that there's so much camaraderie with the people that we work with. And I hope that is evident on air. And I hope it's evident in this podcast, because if it wasn't for that kind of teamwork and the dedication and the passion of everybody that works in this newsroom, we wouldn't have been able to get everything out as quickly as we did and as comprehensive of a manner as we did. And so I thought it was really cool to see our team come together like that. And that means a lot to me as the person that has to go on air to report that. But really, it's not me reporting that. It's everything and the culmination of the work that everybody did. So I just thought that was such an awesome moment of teamwork for everybody that jumped in to help, because we all want to see justice for Preston Lord, and this was a huge update and development in this case. So we will be keeping everybody up to date on the True Crime Arizona podcast. I know we've talked a lot about coming on when there is major developments in Preston Lord's death in this case. And obviously, as you've heard here, there is so much more to come on this. The investigation is not over. We know that everything's going to have to play out legally, and that could be a years-long process. So whenever you want to get the best and most comprehensive information of where this case stands now, turn to True Crime Arizona. We're going to have everything here on the podcast. You can also check out all of our coverage that was on air and digitally on azfamily.com and the AZ Family News app. That will be constantly updated as well. And thank you so much for listening. I know this is a long podcast and we don't always do these discussion type podcasts, but I hope that this was a really good, comprehensive overview of what we learned and why it matters in Preston Lord's death. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney, and produced by Sergio Hernandez. It's a production of Arizona's Family, 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.